Chapter 52. Three-Step Soul Transfer. Ever since Xiao Yan had advanced to the peak of the sovereign realm, Yi Tianqian had given up on the idea of continuing his cultivation. When he left, he threw a soul scroll to Xiao Yan and disappeared without a word. When Xiao Yan finished reading the contents of the scroll, an indescribable joy quickly surged onto his face. There were only a few words on the scroll. After the soul is formed, the cauldron will be opened to refine pills. Within a month, he would familiarize himself with the sudden increase in strength and pick 30 sets of medicinal ingredients to refine the resurrection pill. After a few short lines of words, a soul light diagram formed from a vast and mighty soul was formed. When Xiaoyan's soul entered it for the first time, it was as though he was facing an endless ocean. That kind of feeling was almost suffocating. After gradually familiarizing himself with this soul pressure, Xiaoyan carefully looked at the densely packed soul light clusters within. Within the light clusters were all kinds of medicinal ingredients. There was a variety of different kinds and a variety of dazzling items. It was simply comparable to a medicinal ingredient ancient book. Compared to this, the thing that Zhao Qingshan gave him was at most a child's toy. For a moment, after receiving so many medicinal ingredients, Xiaoyan also felt dizzy in his soul. After looking at it for a while, he felt dizzy and extremely tired in his soul. Looking at the four main medicinal ingredients to refine the returning clarity pill: inkleaf spirit grass, white pearl lotus, 3 leaves profound flower, fresh leaf fruit. Xiao Yan was instantly speechless. To find the introduction and image of these 4 herbs in the countless light clusters was no different from finding a needle in a haystack. This also meant that he needed to look through all of these light clusters before he could find them. This was probably Yi Tianqian's goal. Xiao Yan only took a rough glance at these light clusters. There were at least 200,000 of them. Each light cluster contained a detailed introduction and image of a medicinal ingredient. It could be said that it was extremely harsh to look through all of these medicinal ingredients in a month's time. Even so, Xiao Yan was still unusually happy. This one was more comprehensive than what Zhao Qingshan had given him. The detailed introduction of the herb was very attractive to alchemists. Putting aside everything else, just the strength of Yi Tianqian, the supreme saint. When he was still alive, he had to visit a vast place, and he had seen more precious herbs than any ordinary alchemist. There were even some rare and unique herbs that were only a little bit of them. It's precious enough. In the following period of time, Xiao Yan finally relaxed. He no longer spent any effort on improving his strength. Instead, he placed all of his attention on the hundreds of thousands of medicinal ingredients. Compared to the medicinal ingredients in the fighting key continent, the medicinal ingredients in the Great World had an additional type of dense spiritual key. Compared to the medicinal ingredients that Xiao Yan had randomly refined, these medicinal ingredients that were used to refine true medicine pills were much more agile. Sitting quietly on top of a green rock, Xiao Yan's eyes were tightly shut, and his mind was immersed in the scroll that was floating in front of him. Soul energy flowed out from between his eyebrows, forming a faint dark cloud. The dark cloud continuously entered the scroll, continuously devouring tens of thousands of soul light spheres. With Xiao Yan's rich experience in alchemy and fighting key continent, he was very familiar with some of the herbs. Therefore, he didn't feel much pressure memorizing the herbs in the soul light spheres. His soul entered the dense soul light ball. In just an instant, all the information of the herbs contained in the soul light ball was deeply imprinted in Xiao Yan's mind and the depths of his soul. Although this method was fast, it consumed a lot of mental and soul energy. Yi Tianqian's soul was something that Xiao Yan couldn't catch up to even if he were to butter him up. Even if it was just a wisp of soul light, it would still be impossible for him to catch up with Yi Tianqian's soul. When Xiao Yan's tiny soul power first entered it, it was as if he had crashed into a huge rock, causing his chest to feel stuffy. His head was buzzing, as if it was going to explode. It took him a long time to recover from his drowsy state. Xiao Yan felt a splitting headache and his soul felt like it was being torn apart. He let out a light breath and rested for a while. Then, he carefully controlled his soul to enter the soul light ball again. Time passed quickly. 20 days had quietly passed in a flash. When Xiao Yan, who had been meditating like an old monk for 20 days, suddenly opened his eyes at a certain moment, a joy surged onto the former's face. There are a total of 347,269 medicinal ingredients. Amongst them, there are around 100,000 of them growing on precipice cliff, where no one lives. There are no more than 4,000 types of medicinal ingredients that are commonly used to refine medicine pills. The result of these 20 days was roughly summarized from the bottom of his heart. Xiao Yan stretched his body. Immediately, several dried leaves drifted down from his body. After stretching his meridians, which he hadn't moved for a long time, Xiao Yan slowly got up. After these 20 days of impacting the soul light clusters, a stronger soul energy surged out from between his eyebrows. Xiao Yan also smiled excitedly when he sensed the obvious strength of the soul force. Although Yi Tianshan's soul force was extremely powerful, it had an unexpected effect on tempering one's soul. After memorizing over 300,000 medicinal ingredients, Xiao Yan gently waved his hand and the soul scroll in front of him quietly shattered. It turned into soul spots and dissipated into the world. Xiao Yan smiled slightly as he watched the scroll disappear. Since he had memorized all of the medicinal ingredients, it was time to do his best to search for the medicinal ingredients in the remaining time. White Pearl Lotus. It is white in shape and has 3 flower petals. There is a white pearl within the flower petals and it is filled with a dark and cold feeling. Xiao Yan stood at the top of a mountain and looked at the boundless forest below. After pondering for a while, he whispered the characteristics of the white pearl lotus. At the same time, a white 3-petal white lotus slowly appeared in his mind. The medicinal ingredients in the soul light ball were sorted out after Yi Tianshan's death. According to his previous experience, he completed the characteristics and images of these medicinal ingredients one by one. This was also the reason why Xiao Yan could quickly remember them. Otherwise, just a large piece of text that was as vast as smoke might not even be remembered in 200 days, let alone 20 days. With the help of the images and rich alchemist experience in his mind, Xiao Yan quickly found a slender and graceful white pearl lotus in the dark of a stream. Although it had been washed by the stream for an unknown period of time, the white petals on it were still as clean as new. It could be said that it had not been stained by the mud and was clear and not demonic. With a delighted mood, Xiao Yan carefully picked up the white pearl lotus. Looking at the medicinal herbs in his hand, Xiao Yan's heart suddenly jumped violently. His throat moved and Xiao Yan took a deep breath. He knew that if the soul transformation was successful, then this white pearl lotus might be the first herb he had refined in the great world. Following the same method, he found a few other medicinal ingredients. When he finished plucking the 30 medicinal ingredients needed to refine the Return Clarity pill, a month's time quietly passed. On the plaza paved with limestone, there were lofty mountains in the distance. The dense forest was like an endless sea of green. Waves of wind swept over, bringing along layers of green waves that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Yi Tianshan's gaze swept across the 30 complete sets of medicinal herbs on the ground. He smiled lightly and did not say anything. His gaze turned to Xiao Yan, and his expression suddenly became serious as he said, "Little fellow, I don't want to say the importance and danger of soul transformation again. These medicinal herbs, whether you throw them away as trash or keep the ingredients to refine medicine pills, it all depends on you." Yi Tianshan mused for a moment when he saw Xiao Yan nod with a grave expression. He appeared to be considering his words. A moment later, he slowly opened his mouth and spoke. Soul transformation is divided into 3 steps. The first step is to release all the souls within your body and allow the person who transformed your soul to devour them. What? Xiao Yan couldn't help but be shocked when he heard this. He couldn't help but shout out loud and release all the souls. Wasn't there only an empty shell left? Without a soul, there would be no intelligence and consciousness. If that was the case, what was the difference between him and a dead person? When Yi Tianshan heard Xiao Yan's exclamation, he rolled his eyes and said, "I still want to devour your soul. Although this process isn't very dangerous, it requires a lot of effort. I'm afraid that the old injuries that I've healed for 10,000 years will relapse this time." "I'm not surprised why you are so surprised." Xiao Yan smiled awkwardly when he heard this. However, the shock on his face did not disappear. Yi Tianshan seemed to have seen through Xiao Yan's surprise. He paused for a moment and said, "At that time, you will be the receiver. You will need to release all of your soul and completely sever the connection between you and your soul. After that, I, the transformer, will merge the soul you released into my own soul. Use the power of the soul of the great world to assimilate your soul." Clearing his throat, Yi Tianqian continued, when the assimilation is almost complete, fuse the thickest part of your soul origin and my soul into a new soul body that possesses half of the soul of the great world. After that, I will use the powerful origin monarch key to repeatedly condense and compress it. When the new soul body is condensed into a soul origin, the first step will be completed. After saying a large piece, Yi Tianqian let out a soft sigh. He looked at Xiao Yan, who was deep in thought, and did not say anything. He just sat cross-legged quietly, waiting for Xiao Yan to comprehend it himself. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the confused look on Xiao Yan's face finally disappeared. His pupils became focused again. He looked at Yi Tianqian, who was looking at him with a smile. Xiao Yan grinned and nodded. Elder Yi, this kid understands. During that period of time, Xiao Yan had been thinking about a problem, which was the ownership of the new soul body. As a new ownerless soul body, Xiao Yan was most worried about how to make his memories and other things intact. After some quiet pondering, Xiao Yan finally figured it out. There were all kinds of living things in the world. The biggest reason for this difference was that the soul origin was different. It could be said that the soul origin was intelligent. The source of one's thoughts, the soul origin of every person, was unique. Therefore, even if his soul was assimilated by Elder Yi's soul, the soul origin was still his soul origin's master. With this, the problem that Xiao Yan was most worried about was solved. Yi Tianqian nodded slightly. He organized his thoughts and said, this second step. It should not be difficult for you. After forming a new soul body into a soul origin, you need to place it in the realm of origin monarch key density. After the refinement and fusion of the origin monarch key, 10 days later. Only then will you be able to place it between your eyebrows. The difficulty of this second step was that your body would dry up for dozens of days. If you pour your soul power into it, your physical body might not be able to withstand such a powerful energy and explode. My thought is, during the time you lost your soul, use monarch flames to burn your body and keep it in a state of cultivation. If that's the case, your body will be filled with a trace of vitality. This second step, the danger will be greatly reduced. When Xiao Yan heard this, a hint of joy could not help but rise in his brows. Before he could speak, Yi Tianqian said again, however, what I'm worried about is that you are not very familiar with the control of the 3000 lightning monarch flames. If you use the Chaos Great Monarch Flame, the 3000 lightning monarch flames might have an unpredictable hindrance to the infusion of your soul in an ownerless state. Xiao Yan frowned. What Yi Tianqian said was true. He was indeed not very familiar with the control of the 3000 lightning monarch flames. If it wasn't for the suppression of the Xiaoao in his body, he would probably have to split out a strand of his mind to control it no matter what. Thinking of this, Xiao Yan's expression suddenly became joyful. He suddenly raised his head, and his dark eyes shone with a trace of excitement. Elder Yi, the Xiaoao can completely suppress the 3000 lightning monarch flames. I guarantee that nothing will happen to this kid. Yi Tianqian was startled. Then, he smiled and nodded. That's good. The third step of soul transformation. At the same time, the most important step was to completely fuse the soul origin that was poured into his body with the soul. This step is a little complicated, and I don't know much about it. When the time comes, your mind will recover a little. At that time, I'll guide you step by step. Xiao Yan took a deep breath when he heard this. Although Yi Tianqian had spoken casually about this process, it must have been extremely dangerous. Otherwise, how could there be so few alchemists in the lower realm? But no matter how dangerous it was, he had to succeed in this 3-step soul transfer. Chapter end.